The woman questioning why a stranger was at her mother's funeral had no idea she was speaking about the man who had saved her family from destruction 20 years earlier by adopting her younger sister. The morning fog hung low over Hillcrest Cemetery as mourners gathered around the mahogany casket of Elena Rodriguez, a woman whose 68 years of life had been marked by both profound tragedy and unexpected grace. The funeral service had drawn nearly 200 people, family members, former students from her decades as a high school Spanish teacher, and community members whose lives she had touched through her volunteer work. Among the crowd stood Marcus Washington, a 45-year-old man whose presence seemed to puzzle several family members. He wore a well-tailored black suit that spoke of quiet success, and he carried himself with the dignified bearing of someone accustomed to responsibility and respect. His silver-rimmed glasses reflected the overcast sky as he stood slightly apart from the main family gathering, close enough to pay his respects but distant enough to avoid drawing attention. Marcus was the founder and CEO of Washington Educational Trust, a foundation that had built 12 schools in underserved communities and provided college scholarships to over 3,000 students. His net worth exceeded $180 million, accumulated through a combination of successful real estate investments, educational consulting, and the sale of a revolutionary tutoring software program he had developed. But none of the mourners knew these details about Marcus. To them, he appeared to be just another well-dressed stranger who had somehow found his way to Elena Rodriguez's funeral. What they didn't know was that Elena Rodriguez had been more than a casual acquaintance to Marcus Washington. She had been the mother-in-law he had never officially had, the woman who had entrusted him with her daughter's future when circumstances had made it impossible for her to provide the care that child needed. Standing near the front of the gathering, close to Elena's casket, was her older daughter Carmen Martinez, a 38-year-old attorney who had built a successful practice in family law. Carmen's dark hair was pulled back in a somber bun, and her black dress was appropriately expensive for someone of her professional standing. She had been Elena's primary caregiver during the final months of her mother's battle with cancer, and the weight of grief and exhaustion was visible in her posture. Carmen had always been the achiever in the family, the daughter who had gone to law school, who had married well, who had given Elena the 2 grandchildren who now stood beside her in matching black outfits. Carmen's success had been a source of pride for Elena, proof that despite the family's struggles, at least one daughter had managed to build the kind of life that provided security and respectability. As the minister began the graveside service, Carmen's attention was drawn to Marcus, whose presence continued to puzzle her. She leaned toward her husband, David Martinez, a corporate executive who had known Elena for 15 years. "David," Carmen whispered, "do you know who that man is? The one standing by himself near the oak tree?" David followed her gaze to Marcus, studying him with the analytical eye of someone accustomed to assessing people in business settings. "I don't recognize him. Maybe someone from your mother's volunteer work." Carmen frowned. "I coordinated all the notifications for Mom's community activities. I thought I knew everyone who would be coming." Her curiosity about Marcus's presence was sharpened by a nagging sense of familiarity. There was something about his posture, his careful attention to the service, that suggested this wasn't a casual attendance by a distant acquaintance. He was listening to every word with the intensity of someone who had genuinely cared about Elena Rodriguez. Carmen's confusion deepened when she noticed that Marcus seemed to know exactly when to bow his head during prayers, when to join in reciting the 23rd Psalm, and when to participate in the other rituals of the service. This wasn't someone who had simply shown up out of polite obligation. This was someone who understood the traditions that had been important to Elena. As the minister spoke about Elena's life, highlighting her decades of teaching and her devotion to her family, Marcus found himself remembering a different version of this woman's story. The Elena Rodriguez he had known had been a single mother struggling to raise 2 daughters while battling her own demons of depression and financial instability. 20 years ago, Elena had been a very different person from the respected teacher and grandmother being eulogized today. She had been a woman barely keeping her life together, working multiple jobs to pay rent while dealing with the aftermath of a messy divorce that had left her emotionally shattered and financially devastated. Marcus remembered the Elena who had sat in his office 2 decades earlier, tears streaming down her face as she made the most difficult decision of her life. She had been 38 years old then, the same age Carmen was now, and she had been faced with an impossible choice that would have broken most people. The minister's voice continued to fill the cemetery air, but Marcus was lost in memories of a conversation that had changed multiple lives forever. "Mr. Washington," Elena had said during that meeting 20 years ago, "I need to ask you something that no mother should ever have to ask, but I don't know where else to turn." Marcus had been 25 then, fresh out of graduate school with a master's degree in education and a burning desire to make a difference in children's lives. He had been working as a counselor at a community center, helping families navigate crises while building the foundation for what would eventually become his educational empire. Elena's younger daughter, Sofia, had been 8 years old at the time, a bright, energetic child whose world had been turned upside down by her parents' divorce and her mother's struggles with depression. Carmen, who had been 18 and heading to college, had been Elena's success story, the proof that despite everything, she had managed to raise one daughter who would escape the cycle of poverty and instability. But Sofia was different. She was struggling in school, acting out at home and showing signs of the kind of behavioral issues that often emerged when children felt unsafe or uncertain about their future. Elena loved Sofia desperately, but she was honest enough to recognize that her own mental health struggles and financial instability were creating an environment where Sofia couldn't thrive. "Sofia needs stability that I can't provide right now," Elena had told Marcus during that life-changing conversation. "Carmen is going to college and I'm so proud of her, but I can barely afford to keep us in our apartment. Sofia deserves better than what I can give her." The request that followed had been both heartbreaking and extraordinary. Elena wanted Marcus to consider adopting Sofia, not because she didn't love her daughter, but because she loved her too much to watch her suffer in an unstable environment. Marcus had been young, unmarried, and completely unprepared for parenthood. But he had also recognized something special in 8-year-old Sofia Rodriguez, a spark of intelligence and creativity that reminded him of his own childhood struggles with poverty and instability. The adoption process had taken 8 months to complete. During that time, Marcus had gotten to know Sofia as a complex, sensitive child who needed structure, encouragement, and the kind of educational opportunities that Elena couldn't afford to provide. He had also grown to deeply respect Elena Rodriguez as a mother who was willing to sacrifice her own happiness for her daughter's future. The arrangement they had worked out was unprecedented in Marcus's experience. Elena would remain an active part of Sofia's life, but Marcus would provide the stability, resources, and educational support that would allow Sofia to reach her full potential. It was an open adoption that prioritized the child's needs while preserving the family connections that mattered. Now, 20 years later, Sofia Washington was Dr. Sofia Washington, a pediatric surgeon who had graduated from Harvard Medical School and was completing her residency at one of the country's most prestigious children's hospitals. She was engaged to marry another doctor, and she maintained close relationships with both Marcus and Elena. But Sofia was not at Elena's funeral. She was in Guatemala, where she was spending 6 months providing free surgical care to children in rural communities, a mission that had been inspired by both Marcus's commitment to education and Elena's stories about her own grandmother's immigration from Guatemala decades earlier. Sofia had wanted desperately to attend Elena's funeral, but she was in the middle of performing a series of complex heart surgeries on children who had no other access to pediatric cardiac care. Elena had made Sofia promise not to interrupt this work, even if something happened to her during Sofia's absence. "You saved those children," Elena had told Sofia during their last phone conversation. "That's how you honor me, by being the woman we raised you to be." So Sofia was honoring her mother and adoptive father by operating on a 6-year-old boy in a rural Guatemalan hospital, while Marcus stood alone at Elena's funeral, representing the family that had been created through an extraordinary act of love and sacrifice. Carmen knew none of this history. To her, Marcus was simply a well-dressed stranger, whose presence at her mother's funeral seemed inappropriate and unexplained. As the service continued, Carmen's irritation about Marcus's presence grew stronger. She began to interpret his respectful attention as presumptuous, his familiarity with the service traditions as inappropriate. In her grief and exhaustion, she found herself focusing on this mystery rather than processing her own emotions about losing her mother. "I'm going to ask him who he is," Carmen whispered to David as the minister began the final prayers. "Carmen, maybe wait until after the service," David suggested quietly. This might not be the right time. But Carmen's grief was transforming into anger. Anger at cancer for taking her mother, anger at the exhaustion of caregiving, and now anger at this stranger who seemed to think he belonged at a family gathering where he had no obvious connection. As the service concluded and mourners began to approach the family to offer condolences, Carmen watched Marcus carefully. He didn't approach the receiving line like other attendees. Instead, he stood quietly near Elena's casket for several minutes, his head bowed in what appeared to be private prayer or reflection. Carmen interpreted this behavior as further evidence that Marcus was somehow inserting himself inappropriately into her family's grief. She didn't understand that Marcus was saying goodbye to a woman who had changed his life by trusting him with her daughter's future, or that he was thinking about Sofia, who was thousands of miles away saving children's lives instead of attending the funeral of the woman who had given birth to her. When Marcus finally began to walk toward the cemetery parking lot, Carmen made a decision that would change her understanding of her family's history forever. She followed him. "Excuse me," Carmen called out when she was close enough for Marcus to hear her. "Could I speak with you for a moment?" Marcus turned, and for the first time during the funeral, Carmen got a clear look at his face. There was something in his eyes, a depth of grief that surprised her, that didn't match her assumption that he was a casual acquaintance or professional colleague of her mother's. "Of course," Marcus replied politely. "I'm very sorry for your loss. Your mother was an extraordinary woman." The way he said it, with genuine emotion rather than the polite formality most people used when offering condolences, only added to Carmen's confusion. "Thank you," Carmen said, studying his face more carefully. "I'm sorry, but I have to ask, how did you know my mother? I thought I was familiar with all of her friends and colleagues, but I don't believe we've met." Marcus hesitated, realizing that this conversation was going to be more complicated than he had hoped. He had known this moment might come eventually, but he had hoped it would happen under different circumstances, perhaps when Sofia was present to help explain the history that connected their families. "My name is Marcus Washington," he said simply. "I knew your mother through family connections." Carmen's frown deepened. "Family connections? I'm not sure what you mean. Are you related to someone Elena knew?" Marcus could see that his vague response was only increasing Carmen's suspicion and confusion. He also realized that Elena's death meant there was no longer any reason to maintain the privacy that had surrounded Sofia's adoption, except to respect Sofia's own wishes about how and when that information was shared. "It's complicated," Marcus said carefully. "Perhaps this conversation would be better suited for a different time and place." Carmen's grief and exhaustion were making her less patient than she might normally have been. Marcus's evasiveness struck her as inappropriate for someone who had attended her mother's funeral. "I'm sorry, but I think this is exactly the right time and place," Carmen said, her voice carrying an edge that hadn't been there moments before. "You were at my mother's funeral. You clearly knew her well enough to participate in all the prayers and responses, and now you're being mysterious about how you knew her." She paused, studying Marcus's expensive suit and confident bearing. "Are you someone my mother worked with? A parent of one of her students? Because I handled all the communications about her death, and I'm quite sure I would have remembered your name." Marcus realized that Carmen's questions came from a place of grief and protective love for her mother, not from malice or prejudice. But he also understood that explaining his connection to Elena Rodriguez would require revealing information about Sofia's adoption that wasn't his story to tell. "Mrs. Martinez," Marcus said, using Carmen's married name in an attempt to maintain appropriate formality. "I understand your confusion, and I respect your need to understand who was present at your mother's funeral. But the explanation involves other people's privacy, and I'm not sure this is the appropriate moment to discuss it." Carmen interpreted Marcus's continued evasiveness as confirmation that something was wrong about his presence at the funeral. In her emotional state, she began to construct explanations that reflected her own assumptions about who belonged at family gatherings and who didn't. "Look," Carmen said, her voice rising slightly, "I don't know what your connection to my mother was, but if you can't explain why you're here, then maybe you shouldn't have come." The words hung in the cemetery air like an accusation. Carmen had essentially told Marcus that he didn't belong at Elena Rodriguez's funeral, without knowing that he was there to represent the daughter Elena had loved enough to give away, and who was at that moment honoring Elena's memory by saving children's lives in Guatemala. Marcus felt the familiar sting of being judged and found wanting by someone who knew nothing about his character, his accomplishments, or his connection to the situation at hand. But this time, the judgment was more painful, because it came at the funeral of a woman who had changed his life through her trust and sacrifice. "I understand your concern," Marcus said quietly, his dignity intact despite the hurt Carmen's words had caused. "Please accept my condolences again. Your mother's impact on the world will be remembered." As Marcus walked toward his car, leaving Carmen standing alone in the cemetery, neither of them realized that they had just experienced the opening scene of a story that would transform Carmen's understanding of her family's history and Marcus's role in preserving it. In Guatemala, Dr. Sofia Washington was successfully completing a heart surgery that would save a 6-year-old boy's life. Unaware that the two people who had shaped her existence were having a confrontation that would soon reveal 20 years of hidden love and sacrifice. Marcus Washington sat in his black Mercedes in the cemetery parking lot for 23 minutes after Carmen Martinez had essentially told him he didn't belong at Elena Rodriguez's funeral. The leather seats that normally provided comfort felt cold against his back as he processed the painful irony of what had just occurred. Carmen had no idea that she had just dismissed the man who had spent 2 decades helping to raise her sister, who had paid for Sofia's education from elementary school through medical school, and who had been present for every major milestone in Sofia's life that Elena couldn't afford to attend. The silence in the car was broken only by the soft chime of his phone receiving a text message. Marcus glanced at the screen and saw a message from Sofia, sent from the hospital in Guatemala where she was working. "Dad, just finished the surgery on little Miguel. His heart is perfect now. Thinking of you and Elena today. Love you." The word "dad" on the screen made Marcus's throat tighten. Sofia had started calling him that when she was 12 years old, not because anyone had suggested it, but because that's what he had become to her through years of patient love and consistent presence. Marcus remembered the first time Sofia had used that word. She had been struggling with a math assignment, and after he had spent an hour helping her understand fractions, she had looked up at him with 8-year-old wisdom and said, "Thanks, Dad. You explain things better than my teacher." Elena had been in the kitchen making dinner when Sofia had spoken those words, and Marcus had seen tears in Elena's eyes. Not tears of sadness or jealousy, but tears of gratitude that her daughter felt secure enough to claim Marcus as her father. Now, sitting in the cemetery where Elena was being laid to rest, Marcus found himself remembering all the moments that Carmen had never witnessed. All the ways that Elena Rodriguez had remained an essential part of Sofia's life, even after the adoption was finalized. If this story is touching your heart, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And if you're not subscribed yet, now's the time. Marcus pulled out his phone and opened the photo album he kept labeled Family. The first image was from Sofia's 8th birthday, just 3 months after the adoption had been finalized. In the photo, Sofia was blowing out candles on a cake while Elena and Marcus stood on either side of her, both of them smiling with the complicated joy of adults who had made an extraordinary decision work. Elena had never missed one of Sofia's birthdays. She had attended every school play, every graduation ceremony, every awards banquet where Sofia received recognition for her academic achievements. But she had done so not as Sofia's legal guardian, but as the biological mother who had chosen to step back so her daughter could have opportunities she couldn't provide. The arrangement had been unusual, but it had worked because all 3 of them, Marcus, Elena, and Sofia, had prioritized Sofia's well-being over conventional expectations about family structure. Marcus scrolled through more photos, each one representing a moment when Elena had been present for Sofia's life in ways that Carmen had never known about. Elena cheering from the bleachers when Sofia had won her high school's science fair. Elena crying with pride when Sofia had been accepted to Harvard. Elena beaming in her formal dress at Sofia's medical school graduation, standing between Marcus and Sofia's fiancé. In every photo, Elena looked like what she was, a grandmother figure who had been given the gift of watching her daughter flourish without the burden of providing for her daily needs. Marcus had never asked Elena to step back from Sofia's life. In fact, he had encouraged their relationship, understanding that Sofia needed the cultural connection and family history that only Elena could provide. Sofia spoke fluent Spanish because Elena had insisted on teaching her. Sofia knew how to make tamales because Elena had spent countless weekends in Marcus's kitchen, passing down family recipes. Sofia understood her Guatemalan heritage because Elena had shared stories about their family's immigration and struggles. The relationship between Marcus and Elena had evolved into something unprecedented in his experience, a partnership in raising a child that transcended legal definitions and biological connections. Elena had become family to Marcus not through marriage or blood but through their shared commitment to Sofia's future. When Marcus had made his first $1 million through his educational consulting business, Elena had been one of the first people he had told. When he had expanded his foundation to build schools in underserved communities, Elena had helped him understand the specific needs of Spanish-speaking families. When he had been honored by the mayor for his philanthropic work, Elena had been in the audience, applauding for the young man who had grown into everything she had hoped he would become. Marcus's wealth had grown substantially over the years, but his lifestyle had remained relatively modest. He lived in a comfortable but not ostentatious house in an upper-middle-class neighborhood. He drove nice cars, but not flashy ones. He dressed well, but not in ways that screamed wealth. This humility was partly a result of his own upbringing in a working-class family, but it was also influenced by Elena's values. She had taught him that true success was measured not by what you accumulated, but by what you contributed to other people's lives. Marcus had taken that lesson to heart. His foundation had built 12 schools, but he had never put his name on any of the buildings. His scholarship program had sent over 3,000 students to college, but the scholarships were given anonymously. His wealth allowed him to transform lives, but he did so quietly, without fanfare or recognition. Elena had understood this about Marcus long before he had understood it about himself. During one of their conversations about Sofia's future, when Sofia was 16 and beginning to think about college, Elena had told Marcus something that had stayed with him for nearly a decade. "Marcus," she had said, "Sofia is going to accomplish extraordinary things and she's going to help a lot of people. But the most important thing you've taught her isn't about success or money or even education. You've taught her that real strength comes from lifting other people up." At the time, Marcus had thought Elena was being overly generous in her assessment of his character. Now, as he reflected on the 20 years they had shared as co-parents, he realized that Elena had seen something in him that he hadn't recognized in himself. Marcus's phone buzzed with another message from Sofia. This one included a photo of the 6-year-old boy she had just operated on, smiling from his hospital bed with his parents on either side of him. Miguel's surgery was successful. His parents don't speak English, but they understand that their son is going to live a normal life now. Elena would have loved this moment. Marcus studied the photo, seeing in it everything that Elena Rodriguez had valued: a child receiving care that would transform his future, a doctor who understood the importance of serving communities that had limited resources, and a family whose gratitude transcended language barriers. Sofia had become exactly the person Elena had envisioned when she had made the difficult decision to allow Marcus to adopt her. But Sofia had also remained connected to her cultural heritage and family history in ways that honored Elena's role in shaping her character. Marcus thought about Carmen Martinez, probably at this moment hosting family and friends at a reception following Elena's funeral. Carmen believed she understood her mother's legacy, the respected teacher, the devoted grandmother, the woman who had overcome early struggles to build a stable life. All of that was true, but Carmen didn't know about the most profound aspect of Elena's legacy: her willingness to sacrifice her own desires for her daughter's future, and her success in maintaining a loving relationship with Sofia, despite the unconventional family structure that had resulted from the adoption. Carmen also didn't know that Elena had spent the last 20 years secretly proud of having a daughter who was becoming a doctor, even though she couldn't publicly claim credit for Sofia's accomplishments. During Sofia's medical school graduation, Elena had sat in the audience with Marcus, watching her biological daughter receive her degree while knowing that very few people in that auditorium understood their relationship. "She's going to save so many children," Elena had whispered to Marcus during the ceremony. "Thank you for making this possible." Marcus had replied, "Thank you for trusting me with her." That exchange had captured the essence of their relationship, mutual gratitude for a decision that had allowed Sofia to flourish while preserving the family connections that mattered to her. Now Elena was gone, and Sofia was thousands of miles away honoring Elena's memory by doing exactly what Elena had always believed she would do, using her skills to help children who needed her expertise. Marcus started his car, finally ready to leave the cemetery. As he drove through the gates, he thought about Carmen's words. "Maybe you shouldn't have come." Carmen had spoken from grief and confusion, not malice. But her words had highlighted something that Marcus had always understood about his position in Sofia's life, that his role as her adoptive father existed somewhat outside conventional family structures, and that not everyone would immediately understand or accept his presence at family gatherings. Marcus had never minded being misunderstood by strangers, but being misunderstood by Carmen, Elena's older daughter, Sofia's sister, felt different. It felt like a rejection of the family that Elena had worked so hard to hold together despite its unconventional nature. As Marcus drove home, he made a decision that would change everything. He was going to contact Carmen Martinez and tell her the truth about his connection to Elena Rodriguez. He was going to explain Sofia's adoption, Elena's sacrifice, and the 20-year relationship that had allowed Sofia to become doctor. Sofia Washington, while remaining connected to her cultural heritage and biological family. Carmen deserved to know that her mother's legacy included an act of love so profound that it had transformed multiple lives, and Sofia deserved to have her sister understand the extraordinary circumstances that had shaped their family. But first, Marcus was going to call Sofia in Guatemala and tell her about his encounter with Carmen at the funeral. Because any conversation about Sofia's adoption would need to include Sofia's voice and Sofia's perspective on how much she wanted her sister to know about their shared history. Marcus pulled into his driveway and sat for a moment, thinking about Elena Rodriguez and the courage it had taken for her to trust a 25-year-old man with her daughter's future. Elena had gambled that Marcus would become the father Sofia needed, and that Sofia would grow up understanding that her adoption had been an act of love, not abandonment. 20 years later, that gamble had paid off in ways that Elena had probably never imagined when she had first walked into Marcus's office. Sofia was saving children's lives on a different continent, carrying with her both the educational opportunities Marcus had provided and the cultural values Elena had instilled. But the story was incomplete as long as Carmen remained unaware of the family history that connected her to Marcus and explained Sofia's absence from Elena's funeral. The most important conversation of Marcus's adult life was about to begin. 3 days after Elena Rodriguez's funeral, Carmen Martinez was sitting in her law office, struggling to focus on a child custody case that should have commanded her full attention. The legal brief she was reviewing involved a father seeking increased visitation rights with his 8-year-old daughter, but every time she read the details, her mind drifted back to the mysterious man who had attended her mother's funeral. Marcus Washington's presence at the cemetery continued to puzzle Carmen in ways that were interfering with her ability to process her grief. She had spent the past 3 days replaying their brief conversation, analyzing his expensive suit, his respectful demeanor, and his evasive responses to her questions about his connection to Elena. Carmen had even gone so far as to search for Marcus Washington online, discovering his educational foundation and impressive philanthropic record. The search had only deepened her confusion. What connection could a millionaire educational philanthropist have had with her mother, a retired high school Spanish teacher? Carmen's investigation had revealed that Marcus Washington was the founder of Washington Educational Trust, a foundation that had built 12 schools and provided thousands of scholarships to underserved students. His net worth was estimated at over $180 million, accumulated through real estate investments and educational technology ventures. But none of this information explained why Marcus Washington had attended Elena Rodriguez's funeral, or why he had seemed so emotionally affected by her death. Carmen was still pondering this mystery when her office phone rang. Her assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Mrs. Martinez, there's a Marcus Washington on line 1. He says it's about your mother." Carmen's heart skipped several beats. She had not expected Marcus to contact her, and his decision to call her office rather than her home suggested that this conversation was going to be formal and serious. "Put him through," Carmen said, her legal training kicking in as she prepared for what might be a difficult conversation. "Mrs. Martinez." Marcus's voice was respectful but determined. "Thank you for taking my call. I know our conversation at the cemetery was incomplete. I think it's time I explained my connection to your mother." Carmen straightened in her chair, her lawyer instincts telling her that she was about to receive information that would be significant. "I'm listening, Mr. Washington." "I would prefer to have this conversation in person," Marcus said. "There are things you need to know about your family's history, and I have photographs and documents that will help explain the situation. Would you be willing to meet with me?" Carmen's curiosity was now completely overwhelming her caution. "What kind of family history are we talking about?" Marcus paused, choosing his words carefully. "Mrs. Martinez, what I'm about to tell you is going to change your understanding of your mother's life and your family's structure. I think you should be sitting down, and you should probably clear your schedule for the rest of the afternoon. Mr. Washington, you're making me nervous. Just tell me what this is about." Marcus took a deep breath, realizing that there was no way to ease into this revelation gently. "Mrs. Martinez, I am the adoptive father of your sister, Sofia Rodriguez. Your mother placed Sofia in my care 20 years ago, when Sofia was 8 years old." The silence that followed this statement lasted for nearly 30 seconds. Carmen felt as if the floor of her office had suddenly disappeared beneath her chair. When she finally found her voice, it came out as barely more than a whisper. "What did you just say?" "Your sister Sofia is Dr. Sofia Washington. She's currently in Guatemala, where she's volunteering as a pediatric surgeon. She couldn't attend your mother's funeral because she's in the middle of performing life-saving heart surgeries on children who have no other access to cardiac care." Carmen's mind was reeling as she tried to process this information. "I don't have a sister named Sofia. My mother had 2 daughters, me and... Carmen stopped speaking as a memory from her childhood suddenly surfaced with devastating clarity. She remembered having a younger sister named Sofia, but that memory had been buried under 20 years of family silence. Sofia Rodriguez had been 8 years old when she had simply disappeared from Carmen's life. Carmen had been 18 at the time, focused on starting college and building her own future. Elena had told her that Sofia was living with a family friend during a difficult period, and that it was a temporary arrangement while Elena got back on her feet. But Sofia had never come home. And after a few months, Elena had stopped talking about Sofia altogether. When Carmen had asked about her sister during college breaks, Elena had given vague responses about Sofia being settled and doing well without providing specific details. Over the years, Carmen had assumed that Sofia had been placed in foster care, and that Elena was too ashamed or heartbroken to discuss what had happened. Carmen had stopped asking questions because the topic seemed to cause Elena pain. Now, 20 years later, Carmen was learning that Sofia hadn't disappeared into the foster care system. She had been adopted by Marcus Washington, and she had become a doctor. "Oh my God," Carmen whispered into the phone. "Sofia. My little sister Sofia." "Yes," Marcus said gently. "Your mother never stopped loving Sofia, and Sofia never stopped being part of your family. But the arrangement was unconventional." Carmen was crying now, overwhelmed by the realization that her sister had been alive and thriving for 20 years while Carmen had assumed she was lost forever. "Where is she?" Carmen asked through her tears. Why wasn't she at the funeral? Why didn't my mother tell me? Marcus explained about Sofia's medical mission in Guatemala, about Elena's insistence that Sofia not interrupt her work to attend the funeral, and about the complex family dynamics that had kept Sofia's success hidden from Carmen. Your mother was incredibly proud of Sofia, Marcus said. She attended every graduation, every milestone, every important moment in Sofia's life. But she felt that Sofia's adoption was a private matter, and she wasn't sure how to explain it to you. Carmen felt a surge of anger mixed with her grief. She wasn't sure how to explain it. Sofia is my sister. I had a right to know what happened to her. You're absolutely right, Marcus agreed, and Sofia feels the same way. She's wanted to reconnect with you for years, but she's been waiting for the right moment and the right circumstances. Carmen was quiet for several minutes, processing the magnitude of what she was learning. Her sister was alive. Her sister was a doctor. Her sister had been raised by the mysterious man Carmen had dismissed at their mother's funeral. Mr. Washington, Carmen said finally, I owe you an apology. At the cemetery, I essentially told you that you didn't belong there. I had no idea. You were protecting your mother's memory, Marcus interrupted. I understand your reaction. You were grieving and you didn't have the context to understand my presence. Carmen was beginning to understand the full scope of her ignorance about her own family's history. Tell me about Sofia. What is she like? What kind of person did she become? Marcus smiled, though Carmen couldn't see it through the phone. She's extraordinary. She's brilliant, compassionate, and completely committed to helping children. She speaks 3 languages fluently, including the Spanish your mother taught her. She's engaged to marry another doctor, and she's planning to establish a nonprofit organization that provides free pediatric surgery in developing countries. Carmen felt a mixture of pride and sadness as she listened to Marcus describe Sofia's accomplishments. She sounds incredible, and I've missed her entire life. You haven't missed her entire life, Marcus corrected gently. Sofia is 28 years old. You have many years ahead of you to build a relationship with her. Carmen was quiet for a moment, thinking about the implications of this revelation. Mr. Washington, can I ask you something? Why did you adopt Sofia? You were young, unmarried. Taking on an 8-year-old child must have completely changed your life. Marcus thought about how to answer this question honestly. I was working as a counselor at the time, and I had gotten to know Sofia through her behavioral issues at school. She was struggling academically and emotionally because of the instability in her home environment. Your mother recognized that Sofia needed more structure and resources than she could provide. Marcus paused, remembering Elena's courage during those difficult conversations. Your mother made an incredibly selfless decision. She loved Sofia enough to give her opportunities that she couldn't afford to provide herself. Carmen was crying again, this time understanding the magnitude of her mother's sacrifice. She gave up her daughter so Sofia could have a better life. Yes, and it worked. But Sofia never stopped being your mother's daughter, and your mother never stopped being part of Sofia's life. Carmen felt overwhelmed by the complexity of emotions she was experiencing. Grief for her mother, anger about the family's secrets, amazement at Sofia's accomplishments, and guilt about the 20 years of separation. Mr. Washington, I need to see Sofia. I need to talk to her. Is that possible? Sofia wants that too, Marcus assured her. She'll be returning from Guatemala in 6 weeks. But Carmen, there's something else you should know. What? Marcus hesitated, realizing that he was about to reveal information that might be even more emotionally difficult for Carmen to process. Sofia was at your mother's bedside during her final week. She flew back from Guatemala when Elena's condition deteriorated, and she stayed with her until Elena's doctor confirmed that she was stable enough for Sofia to return to her medical mission. Carmen felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. Sofia was here, during Mom's final week, and I didn't know? Elena asked Sofia not to contact you during that visit. Elena felt that introducing Sofia during such an emotional time would be overwhelming for everyone involved. Carmen understood the logic of Elena's decision, but she also felt cheated out of the opportunity to share her mother's final days with her sister. Carmen, Marcus continued, there's one more thing I need to tell you, and it's going to be difficult to hear. Carmen braced herself for another revelation. What is it? Your mother's medical bills for her cancer treatment were substantial. Elena had excellent insurance through her teacher's retirement system, but there were experimental treatments and additional care that weren't covered. Carmen nodded, remembering the financial stress that Elena's illness had created. I helped with some of those costs, but it was expensive. Carmen, Marcus said gently, I paid for your mother's medical bills. All of them. Elena never wanted you to know, but she allowed me to cover the costs because she felt that it was part of my responsibility as Sofia's father to help care for the woman who had given Sofia life. This final revelation left Carmen speechless. Marcus Washington hadn't just adopted her sister 20 years ago. He had continued to support Elena throughout her final illness, paying for medical care that Carmen herself couldn't afford. Why? Carmen whispered. Why would you do all of this? Marcus's answer came from 20 years of gratitude for Elena's trust and love for Sofia. Because Elena Rodriguez changed my life by trusting me with Sofia's future. Because Sofia became my daughter in every way that matters. And because taking care of Elena was my way of honoring the woman who had made our family possible. Carmen realized that she had spent 3 days angry at the wrong person. Marcus Washington hadn't been an intruder at Elena's funeral. He had been family in ways that Carmen was only beginning to understand. Mr. Washington, Carmen said through her tears, I don't know how to process all of this. I feel like I've been living in ignorance about my own family for 20 years. Carmen, your mother kept these secrets because she was trying to protect everyone involved. She wanted Sofia to flourish without feeling guilty about her advantages, and she wanted you to build your own life without feeling responsible for family obligations that were beyond your control. Carmen was beginning to understand Elena's motivations, but she still felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she had learned. What happens now? She asked. Marcus had been thinking about this question for 3 days. Now you have the choice to build a relationship with Sofia, if you want one, and you have the opportunity to understand your mother's legacy more completely. Carmen knew with absolute certainty that she wanted to know Sofia. Yes, I want to meet her. I want to know my sister. Then that's what we'll arrange, Marcus promised. But Carmen, there's something I need you to understand about Sofia. She doesn't know that you were unaware of her existence. She's been assuming that you chose not to have a relationship with her. This revelation added another layer of complexity to an already overwhelming situation. She thinks I rejected her. She thinks you were too busy building your career and your own family to maintain contact with a sister who was being raised by someone else. Carmen felt a new surge of guilt. Oh God. She's been thinking that for 20 years? Yes. So when you meet Sofia, you'll need to explain that Elena never told you about the adoption, and that you've been wondering what happened to her all these years. Carmen realized that her reunion with Sofia was going to be even more emotionally charged than she had anticipated. Both sisters had been operating under false assumptions about the other's choices and motivations. But despite the complexity of the situation, Carmen felt a sense of excitement that she hadn't experienced since before Elena's cancer diagnosis. She was going to have her sister back. She was going to meet the extraordinary woman that Sofia had become. And she was going to finally understand the full scope of Elena Rodriguez's legacy, a mother who had loved both of her daughters enough to make sacrifices that neither of them had fully understood. The conversation with Marcus Washington had changed everything Carmen thought she knew about her family, but it had also opened the door to relationships and connections that she had thought were lost forever. For the first time since Elena's death, Carmen felt hope instead of only grief. 6 weeks later, Carmen Martinez stood in the arrivals area of Los Angeles International Airport, holding a sign that read, Dr. Sofia Washington, in careful lettering. Her hands were trembling slightly, not from nervousness about meeting a stranger, but from the overwhelming emotion of reuniting with a sister she had thought was lost forever. Marcus Washington stood beside Carmen, having offered to facilitate this reunion between the two women who had shaped his understanding of family for the past 20 years. In the weeks since his phone call with Carmen, Marcus had spoken with Sofia multiple times, helping both sisters understand the misconceptions that had kept them apart. Sofia's reaction to learning that Carmen had been unaware of her adoption had been a mixture of relief, sadness, and excitement. For 20 years, Sofia had assumed that Carmen had chosen not to maintain contact with her adopted sister. Learning that Carmen had actually been wondering about Sofia's whereabouts had transformed Sofia's understanding of their family dynamics. The conversations between Marcus and Sofia had also revealed the depth of Sofia's love for Elena and her gratitude for the adoption that had shaped her life. Sofia had never felt abandoned by Elena's decision. Instead, she had understood it as an act of profound love that had given her opportunities she wouldn't have had otherwise. Now, as they waited for Sofia's flight to arrive, Carmen found herself thinking about the conversation she had had with Elena during her mother's final week, when Elena had seemed to want to tell Carmen something important, but had lacked the strength or courage to complete the confession. "Carmen," Elena had whispered from her hospital bed, "there are things about our family. Things I should have told you years ago." Carmen had assumed Elena was referring to old family stories or regrets about her parenting choices. Now Carmen understood that Elena had been trying to find the courage to tell Carmen about Sofia's adoption and the extraordinary family that had grown from that decision. Carmen wished desperately that Elena could be present for this reunion, but she also understood that Elena's love had made this moment possible. Without Elena's courage in placing Sofia with Marcus, and without Elena's continued presence in Sofia's life, this family connection would never have existed. The flight from Guatemala City arrived on schedule, and Carmen watched anxiously as passengers began emerging from the customs area. Marcus had shown Carmen dozens of photos of Sofia over the past 6 weeks, but Carmen was still nervous about recognizing her sister after 20 years of separation. Then Sofia appeared, and Carmen's recognition was instant and overwhelming. Despite 2 decades of different experiences and environments, Sofia still had the same dark eyes and expressive face that Carmen remembered from their childhood. But now Sofia carried herself with the confidence of a woman who had accomplished extraordinary things and who understood her own worth. Sofia was wearing scrubs and a white coat, having traveled directly from her medical mission without taking time to change clothes. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she looked exhausted from weeks of performing complex surgeries in challenging conditions. But when Sofia saw Marcus and Carmen waiting for her, her entire face transformed with joy and relief. She dropped her luggage and ran toward them, tears streaming down her face. "Dad," Sofia said as she hugged Marcus tightly, "I missed you so much." Then Sofia turned to Carmen, and for a moment both sisters simply looked at each other, trying to process 20 years of separation and the magnitude of what they had both lost and found. "Carmen," Sofia said softly, "I can't believe you're here. I can't believe we're finally—" Carmen didn't let Sofia finish the sentence. She pulled her sister into a fierce hug, holding her as tightly as she had when they were children. "I'm so sorry," Carmen whispered. "I'm so sorry I didn't know. I'm so sorry I wasn't there for you." "I'm sorry too," Sofia replied, crying freely now. "I thought you didn't want to know me. I thought you were too busy with your own life to care about what happened to me." The sisters held each other in the middle of the busy airport, oblivious to the crowds of travelers moving around them. Marcus watched this reunion with tears in his own eyes, thinking about Elena Rodriguez and how proud she would have been to see her daughters together again. After several minutes, Sofia pulled back to look at Carmen more carefully. "You look exactly like I remembered, just older, more sophisticated." Carmen laughed through her tears. "You look nothing like I remembered. You were 8 years old when I last saw you. Now you're this accomplished doctor who saves children's lives." Sofia glanced at Marcus with affection. "Dad made that possible. He believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." Carmen felt a surge of gratitude toward Marcus that was almost overwhelming. "He told me about your medical school graduation, about your engagement, about the work you're doing in Guatemala. I'm so proud of you, Sofia, and I'm so sorry I missed all of it." Sofia took Carmen's hand. "You didn't miss it by choice. Elena never told you what happened. We both know now that she was trying to protect everyone involved. The three of them collected Sofia's luggage and made their way to Marcus's car, where they continued talking about the 20 years of separation and the family dynamics that had kept them apart. During the drive to Marcus's house, Sofia described her work in Guatemala, the children she had operated on, and her plans to establish a non-profit organization that would provide free pediatric surgery in developing countries. Elena taught me that success isn't about what you achieve for yourself, Sofia explained. It's about what you contribute to other people's lives. Every surgery I perform in Guatemala is my way of honoring her memory. Carmen listened to Sofia talk about their mother with a mixture of pride and sadness. It was clear that Sofia and Elena had maintained a close relationship throughout the adoption, and that Elena's values had shaped Sofia's character in profound ways. "Sofia," Carmen said, "I want you to know that I'm going to help with your nonprofit organization. I specialize in family law, but I have experience with organizational structures and legal compliance. I want to be part of what you're building." Sofia's face lit up with excitement. "Really? You would do that?" "Of course. We're sisters. We should be working together." Marcus listened to this conversation with deep satisfaction, realizing that Elena's dream of seeing her daughters support each other was finally being realized, even though Elena herself wasn't present to witness it. When they arrived at Marcus's house, Sofia showed Carmen the room that had been hers throughout high school and college, a room that Elena had helped decorate and that contained photos spanning 20 years of Sofia's life. Carmen studied the photos carefully, seeing Elena's presence in almost every important moment of Sofia's life. Elena at Sofia's high school graduation. Elena at Sofia's medical school graduation. Elena at Sofia's engagement party. Elena beaming with pride as Sofia received awards for academic achievement and community service. "She never missed anything important," Sofia explained. "She was always there, cheering me on, supporting my dreams." Carmen felt a complex mixture of emotions as she realized how active Elena had been in Sofia's life, while keeping Carmen completely unaware of Sofia's existence. "I understand why she kept it secret," Carmen said finally. "She was protecting both of us from having to navigate a complicated family situation. But I wish I had known. I wish I could have been part of your life too." Sofia sat down beside Carmen on the bed. "We can't change the past 20 years. But we can decide what happens with the next 20 years. Carmen nodded, feeling a sense of possibility that she hadn't experienced since before Elena's cancer diagnosis. Over the following weeks, Carmen and Sofia spent countless hours together, sharing stories about their separate lives and beginning to build the sisterly relationship they had been denied for 2 decades. Carmen learned that Sofia had always wondered about her, that Sofia had asked Elena repeatedly about Carmen's life and career. Elena had shared general information about Carmen's success as a lawyer and her marriage to David, but she had discouraged direct contact between the sisters. Sofia learned that Carmen had never stopped missing her, that Carmen had assumed Sofia was lost in the foster care system, and that Carmen had felt guilty for years about not being able to help Sofia during their family's crisis. Both sisters came to understand that Elena's decision to keep them separated had been motivated by love and a desire to protect them from complicated emotions and divided loyalties. Elena had wanted Sofia to bond completely with Marcus as her father, and she had wanted Carmen to build her own life without feeling responsible for Sofia's welfare. If this story moved you, don't stop here. Click the next one, subscribe, and share this with someone who still believes in kindness. 3 months after Sofia's return from Guatemala, the three of them, Carmen, Sofia, and Marcus, held a private memorial service for Elena Rodriguez at the cemetery where she was buried. This time, when Marcus stood beside Elena's grave, he wasn't alone and misunderstood. He was surrounded by the family that Elena's courage and sacrifice had made possible. Carmen spoke first, reading a letter she had written to Elena about her gratitude for Elena's role in preserving Sofia's connection to their family heritage. Sofia spoke next, describing Elena's influence on her commitment to serving children who needed medical care. Marcus spoke last, thanking Elena for trusting him with Sofia's future, and for teaching him that real family was created through love and commitment, not just biological connections. As they stood together at Elena's grave, Carmen realized that her mother's legacy was more complex and beautiful than she had ever imagined. Elena hadn't just been a devoted teacher and grandmother, she had been a woman with the courage to make extraordinary sacrifices for her daughter's future. Sofia realized that her success as a doctor wasn't just her own achievement, it was the result of Elena's vision and Marcus's commitment working together to create opportunities that neither could have provided alone. Marcus realized that his wealth and success had meaning primarily because they had allowed him to honor Elena's trust and contribute to Sofia's development into the extraordinary woman she had become. 6 months later, Carmen and Sofia officially launched the Rodriguez Washington Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to providing free pediatric surgery in developing countries and educational scholarships for children from low-income families. The foundation's mission statement read, "In memory of Elena Rodriguez, who understood that love sometimes means letting go, and in honor of Marcus Washington, who understood that family is created through commitment and care." The foundation's first project was building a pediatric surgical center in rural Guatemala, where Sofia would spend 3 months each year providing free medical care to children who had no other access to specialized treatment. Carmen managed the foundation's legal and administrative operations from Los Angeles, while also maintaining her family law practice. David Martinez, Carmen's husband, became the foundation's financial advisor, contributing his business expertise to ensure the organization's long-term sustainability. The foundation's work attracted national attention, and within 2 years, Sofia and Carmen were invited to speak at medical conferences and educational summits about the importance of international medical missions and the power of unconventional family structures. During one of these speaking engagements, Sofia told the audience about Elena's decision to place her for adoption and the family that had resulted from that choice. "My biological mother loved me enough to give me opportunities she couldn't provide," Sofia said. "My adoptive father loved me enough to help me maintain my connection to my cultural heritage and biological family. And my sister loved me enough to forgive 20 years of separation and join me in building something meaningful together." Sofia paused, looking out at the audience of medical professionals and educators. Real family isn't defined by who shares your DNA or who raised you from birth. Real family is defined by who shows up for your life, who supports your dreams, and who helps you become the person you're meant to be. The audience gave Sofia a standing ovation, but Carmen, who was watching from the front row, was crying too hard to clap. She was thinking about Elena Rodriguez, who had shown up for both of her daughters' lives in different but equally important ways. Carmen was also thinking about Marcus Washington, the man she had dismissed at Elena's funeral, who had turned out to be the person who had made all of this possible. 5 years after that awkward encounter at the cemetery, Carmen and Marcus had developed a relationship that was part friendship, part family, and completely unique. Marcus had become the brother-in-law Carmen had never had, the person who understood Sofia's character better than anyone else, and who could offer insights into Sofia's perspective that helped Carmen navigate their renewed relationship. Carmen had also become an important part of Marcus's life, serving as Sofia's advocate within their biological family, and helping Marcus understand the cultural traditions that were important to Sofia's sense of identity. On the 5th anniversary of Elena's death, the 3 of them returned to Hillcrest Cemetery for another memorial service. This time they brought Elena's first great-grandchild, Sofia's 6-month-old daughter Elena Rodriguez Washington, named in honor of the grandmother who had made her existence possible. As Carmen held little Elena while Sofia and Marcus placed flowers on Elena Rodriguez's grave, Carmen thought about the question she had asked 5 years earlier. Why is he even here? Now Carmen understood that Marcus had been there because he was family in every way that mattered. He had been there because Elena Rodriguez had trusted him with her daughter's future, and he had honored that trust for 20 years. But most importantly, Marcus had been there because love creates family connections that transcend conventional definitions and social expectations. Elena Rodriguez had died knowing that her daughters would find each other eventually, and that when they did, they would understand that her decision to separate them temporarily had been an act of love, that had ultimately brought them back together stronger than before. The woman who had questioned why Marcus belonged at Elena's funeral had learned that family isn't about who you expect to see at important moments. It's about who shows up with love, commitment, and the courage to honor the connections that matter most. As they walked away from Elena's grave with little Elena sleeping peacefully in Carmen's arms, the three adults who had been brought together by Elena's sacrifice understood that they were living proof of her greatest lesson, that love sometimes requires us to make choices that don't make sense to other people, but that ultimately create the families we need and the futures we deserve. Real gold isn't something you wear around your neck or display for others to admire. Real gold is the love that connects people across years of separation, the trust that allows someone to care for another person's child as their own, and the courage to build relationships that honor both sacrifice and hope. Elena Rodriguez had been real gold, and the family she had created through her extraordinary decision continued to shine long after she was gone.